I did my topic brief on teacher tenure in the public school system. Teacher tenure emerged in the late 1800s and early 1900s during the labor movement. Massachusetts was one of the first states to pass some sort of teacher tenure, and then New Jersey followed in the early 1900s, passing a law that encompassed both elementary and secondary teachers. It was designed to protect teachers from being fired for political, religious, or social beliefs, and helped ensure that teachers were given due process when facing dismissal for any reason. It was important to help protect teachers so that they would not be fired by the whim of a principal or because of nepotism, or the Board of Education didn't agree with the teacher, and ensured that there was some sort of formal process for that. Teacher tenure works that once a teacher had taught for a certain minimum number of years, then tenure was granted. Teacher tenure has gone through quite a bit of change in the last few years, especially with the accountability movement brought on by No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. Currently, there are 31 states that automatically grant teacher tenure after the completion of a certain number of probationary years. From this graphic, you can see that the largest portion of states, 32 of them, require 3 years of teaching before a teacher would be automatically granted tenure. The longest period is 5 years, and that's 6 different states have required 5 years. Only one state, Mississippi, requires 1 year before a teacher is granted tenure. The accountability movement has started to see a change in teacher tenure by some states tying student performance to the teacher tenure process. There are 11 states that use student performance as the primary criterion of granting tenure to teachers. 9 states consider some evidence of student performance before granting tenure. Utah is one of the states that grants automatic tenure after the probationary period. The due process standards for teacher tenure were based on a case, Cleveland Board of Education versus Loudermill. This went before the Supreme Court, and there were 3 standards that came about in this case. First is that written notice of all charges will be given to the teacher, and they get to see an explanation of all the evidence that the school has against them, and then they have the opportunity to present their side of the story at a formal hearing that can be requested. Each school district will come up with their own due process standards that are written into their district policies, but they all have to follow this minimum standard of due process. For my field activity, I interviewed a teacher and a principal. The teacher had taught for a number of years, over 20 years, and it was interesting to get her side of about teacher tenure. She felt that automatic tenure was not helpful. She has been around and long enough to see many teachers who do not belong in the profession, and she's been on teams in elementary school where she teaches that have had many ineffective teachers, and she expressed how difficult it is for the whole team when you have to work with a bad teacher. It puts a lot of pressure on the other teachers to pick up the slack, and it affects morale, and it definitely affects the kids that have that teacher. In her experience, she's seen a lot of ineffective teachers that are just passed from school to school, and that's frustrating for her to see that, instead of having the ineffective teachers be dismissed when it's warranted. I talked with a principal who's had experience teaching at an elementary and secondary level, as a principal at an elementary and secondary level, and has actually had gone through the process of dismissing a couple teachers for ineffective performance. He discussed and expressed how difficult and time-consuming the process is. But to follow through and do it, he said the big key was documentation, and he felt that it was easier to document performance if you had the more objective the observation tool was. He liked one district that he taught in before where he is currently. He felt that the tool that the district used for their observations was much better than what he currently uses, and it was very objective, and so it was easier to get the data to do that. Currently, in practice, there are very few teachers who are dismissed because of being ineffective. It's just one of the biggest raps against teacher tenure is that it's so difficult to get teachers fired, and it is a time-consuming and expensive process if you have to document and know that your standards are going to be caught, maybe go to court or in a hearing and have to stand up. Nationwide, in the latest statistics from the 2011-2012 year, only 0.1% of teachers are dismissed because of unsatisfactory performance. In Utah, in that same year, on average, 2.6 teachers were dismissed from in our schools in Utah, and the average number of teachers per school district is 279 teachers in a school district on average throughout the whole state, and only 2.6 of those teachers were dismissed for any reason, and 0.3% were dismissed for poor performance. So it's not very common that that happens. Takeaway for us, I think, as future administrators, is that it's easiest to dismiss a teacher during the probationary period, and this was especially brought out by the principal that I talked to during my field activity. He said, you know what, just weed out the poor ones during the probationary period where you don't have the due process. They're a probationary teacher, and if you have cause, you don't even have to have cause. You can just get rid of them during that time. And so it's really easy to figure out who the really poor teachers are and who the really good ones are during that time. He says the biggest problem are teachers who are borderline. They're effective to a minimum standard. They're just good enough to not be a really poor teacher, but they're not great either. And those are the hardest to dismiss. Part of it is it's difficult to tie and point that their ineffectiveness is due to themselves only and not other outside factors that we've all seen in schools. So the other takeaway is you have to document. In other words, you've got to be in the classrooms and have observation and really good objective observations that show that teacher's ineffective. And then, of course, you got to know the standards of due process and be able to follow those.